What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Week 3, September 21st edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. 13 NFL games today, a ton of value, a ton of really good plays. I think it should make for a pretty fun slate. You're going to have, obviously, pretty significant ownership on a lot of players that are underpriced and project really well, but there's so many of them that it should spread ownership out at least somewhat. I think that in a lot of cases, you're talking like 20 to 30% ownership on guys as opposed to like 50 to 60, which is nice. $1 million to first on DraftKings in the $20 Millie Maker, $1 million to first in the 555, $300K to first in the $15 on FanDuel. Not going to talk FanDuel here, but obviously a lot of the stuff I say carries over. Pricing on DraftKings is really soft. You can kind of do whatever you want. Not only do you have underpriced running backs as a result of a lot of injuries and underpriced quarterbacks as a result of a lot of injuries, you also have underpriced wide receivers as a result of, DraftKings not giving a fuck. So your decisions on DraftKings are kind of the fun ones, like which really good players do I want to play as opposed to how do I afford the really fun or the really good players. So probably going to be a high scoring week, I would assume, but should be pretty fun for building lineups. Going to go through game by game and talk about what I'm interested in, anything that I saw as I worked on stuff throughout the week. And then I'll take a look at the end at the player exposures I would have if the slate started right now using the Run the Sims Sim Runner Pro tool that you will see on the screen. If you have not already signed up for Run the Sims, link is in the description below. We have something for everybody over there. We have price points that I think make sense for everyone as well. $25 gets you in the door with access to projections and a limited set of simulated lineups. And then you can just, go from there. Classic optimizer that you were used to before Sims, prop tool. We have everything, or we have a lot. And I think very reasonable price points to get in. So link is in the description below. Going to start things off with the Rams taking on the Eagles. About a 20.5 total here for the Rams, about 24 for the Eagles. Starting on the Rams side, there's the passing game, I think, looks interesting as far as Puka and Devontae Adams. I don't think there's a lot else. Kyren Williams, obviously, you can always play in large field tournaments just because he is Kyren Williams. He gives you touchdown equity, etc. But we did see for, after Sean McVay saying it for like 2 years in a row, we actually saw the Rams cut back Kyren Williams' workload a little bit in week 2. Blake Corum got more work. So that is obviously a risk for Kyren Williams because he's not the most efficient runner. He's not the most utilized pass catcher out of the backfield, but he always has had fantasy value, substantial fantasy value, because he's the only running back that the Rams would ever use. It remains to be seen if this is a weekly occurrence or not, but we do know that McVay finally did it, finally used Blake Corum last week, and that's something that he has said he wants to do, and he said he would like to continue doing. So my assumption for now is that Kyren Williams is still the clear running back 1 in the Rams backfield, but did walk back pretty significantly compared to how you normally project Kyren Williams' workload for what it seems like the Rams want to do. In the passing game, though, Puka is just getting an unbelievable amount of targets so far this season, replacing Cooper Kupp with Devontae Adams. Obviously, Adams, a red zone threat, somebody that maybe takes away some touchdown looks from Puka, but there was a pretty good chance that you were going to see Puka's already very high target share go up, even with with Kupp gone, and that's been the case so far. 0.43 targets per route run so far for Puka, also 0.37 for Devontae Adams. So you've really seen the Rams just funnel everything into throwing the ball to these two guys. Tight ends, Tyler Higbee, haven't really been involved very much. Kyren, not a big passing threat, as I mentioned, out of the backfield. You don't really have a wide receiver 3 threat here. So Puka does look like the priority here, especially in full PPR, but Devontae Adams looks pretty good as well. More ownership likely to come into Puka, have him projected for about 28% ownership compared to 11 for Adams, but they both look pretty good here. Puka clearly the priority. Those are the only two guys that I really have interest in from the Rams. On the other side for the Eagles, this is a spot that I think is going a little bit under or overlooked. I don't even necessarily want to say under-owned because that implies that the field is like making a mistake in not really rostering guys from it. But when you think about the upside here, as opposed to the median projections, I do think that on a slate like this, where salary isn't really an issue, you do have the ability to be different by going to the Eagles, specifically in the passing game. Saquon Barkley obviously looks fine if you just want to go there at running back, projected for 11% ownership. That is less than a lot of running backs are going to get on this slate at running back. As far as at the top end in terms of ownership, you have the underpriced guys stepping into a bigger role, like Jordan Mason, like Kenneth Walker, with Charbonnet unlikely to play. And then at the top, you have McCaffrey, you have Bijan Robinson. So it kind of leaves Barkley, where clearly people are going to play Saquon Barkley, but not at the same rate that they're going to play those other guys. So it does make him somewhat contrarian in that sense. You have Jonathan Taylor at the top as well as another guy that people are going to go to. But in the passing game here, we've seen the Eagles just really not get it going so far through the air this season. That's not going to be the case. Like, this is just one of, in every game, this is just one of those spots where if you do zoom out and you think about what we know about the Eagles, we know they have a very talented passing game, and we know it's going to be inconsistent on a game-to-game basis because they don't always need to throw, and they do have such a run-heavy approach with Hurts at quarterback and with Barkley in the backfield. But just because they didn't throw a lot in the first two games, that doesn't change what we know about them. It doesn't mean it's still two games. It doesn't mean that they're never going to throw again. They're never going to have a big offensive output through the air again. It's no different than if in weeks 9 and 10, they happen to just not do much passing. Week 11, you wouldn't just assume they're never going to throw again. But because it's week 1 and week 2, there is a tendency to just be like, oh, wow, this is, even different than last year. Last year they had like a 58% rush percentage for the course of the season. So far this year, they're at 61 to 62%. It's probably going to come down. And even last year when they were at 58%, it wasn't a weekly thing, but you had plenty of weeks where Hurts and at least a pass catcher looked really, really good. So this is a week where I think they're a pretty interesting way to get different. You get obviously a lot of rushing touchdown equity with Jalen Hurts at 6,800, only projected for 3% ownership. And then if they do throw, another nice thing about the Eagles, they are one of the teams that has a concentrated group of receivers. If they get it done through the air, there's a very good chance that those passing touchdowns are going to some combination of A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, and to a lesser extent, Barkley. So you don't have to worry quite as much, not to say that it will never happen, but you don't have to worry quite as much about the times where you stack up Hurts plus Brown or Hurts plus Smith or whatever it may be, and then the Eagles do get it done through the air, but it was Jahan Dotson that you needed, or it was, Calcaterra or something like that. Again, not that it never happens, but it's pretty unusual with the Eagles. They're generally very concentrated to Brown, Smith, Goddard, Barkley. So I think that they're a pretty interesting stack to get to. Again, relatively expensive because of Hurts, but you have seen prices come down on the pass catchers because they haven't done anything through the first couple of weeks. Only 6,300 for Brown, only 5,300 for Smith. Goddard's at 3,700. These are all guys that at some point this year, you'll probably have 6,300 on Smith, 7,300 on Brown, 4,700 on Goddard. So I do think that the pass catchers are underpriced in addition to being low owned. The ceiling is certainly high, even if the median projection is, kind of middle of the road. So I do think they're interesting in tournaments. Jets taking on the Bucs in Tampa Bay. No Justin Fields for the Jets this week. Tyrod Taylor is in instead. About an 18-point total for the Jets. About a 25-point total here for the Bucs. Nothing super appealing for the Jets, but there are a couple of secondary plays with Breece Hall and with Garrett Wilson. Breece Hall coming in at 6K. Again, that's just going to look pretty good. From an upside standpoint, a lot of weeks he would certainly be more than 10% owned. You do probably get an increased workload for Hall here. Taylor will run, but not necessarily to the same extent that Justin Fields does. So you get a little bit more rushing touchdown equity for Hall than he normally has. You also get a little bit, most likely, more work in the passing game, just because, again, even though Taylor will use his legs, he will run. Fields is really looking to take off as soon as there's any pressure. Taylor maybe checks down to Hall a little bit more frequently. So there are a couple things working in Hall's favor here, and he is reasonably priced as well at 6K. Garrett Wilson playing pretty much every snap here. He is the only part of the passing game that I would have any interest in. Josh Reynolds is out. I assume those routes are pretty much being replaced by Tyler Johnson at 3K. Probably going to be on the field a lot, but you don't need the value on this slate. I don't really have interest there. But Garrett Wilson, obviously very good. 6,200, easy to get into your lineups, 5% owned. You could make the case that from a passing game standpoint, Taylor is an upgrade on Fields. But either way, the passing game, not that they're going to throw a lot most likely, but the passing game should go through Garrett Wilson and to a lesser extent, Breece Hall. And this is a game also where they are 7.5 point dogs. So they may be forced to throw more eventually, even though that's obviously not what they would really like to do. On the Tampa Bay side, you do have Egbuka, who was questionable / probable. You've kind of had conflicting reports on him between Rap Sheet and Schefter. I think the reports are kind of the same. Rap Sheet said that he wasn't expected to be limited. He's good to go and likely to have his normal workload. Schefter said that Tampa Bay coaches will be monitoring his snaps and he will be potentially limited based on how he's feeling. That obviously could mean that they're going in with the intention of limiting him. Whenever I see something worded like that, though, and this goes back to NBA DFS, I always read it as the coaches are going to be paying attention to how he feels. If he doesn't feel good, he's going to play less. So I kind of view it as not really changing what you already assumed going in. If he's out there and he feels good, he's going to play a lot. He's played almost every passing snap so far for the Bucs. If he gets banged up or re-aggravates his injuries during the game, he's going to play less, which is kind of common sense. So I don't really think it moves the needle as far as outlook. I also don't think it matters too much. He's not getting any ownership. He's 6,300. It's going to be really tough to want to get to him because even though he has run good on touchdown variants so far, 3 touchdowns through the first 2 games, he hasn't been targeted that heavily. And then you also just have so many good, clear number one wide receivers in this price range as well. I'd rather go to Mike Evans if I go to one of them. You don't have the injury concern, which is, at least some minor point, but 6,600 for Evans. We haven't seen him get the touchdowns yet, but you know that they're coming. He's getting 11% ownership. I like him at that price tag. Outside of Evans, you have Bucky Irving at 7,100, only getting 4% ownership. I do think he's a somewhat appealing tournament pivot. Team is a 7.5 point favorite. And we know that Irving is very involved in the passing game. He gets the bulk of the rushing workload as well. Some minor concern that you did see more of a split in week 2 between him and Rachaad White than you did in week 1. And more importantly, probably Rachaad White played really well. They went to him more than you would expect down the stretch of that game because he was having so much success. So I'd be a little surprised if they go back to just Bucky Irving gets every carry today, but I still expect Bucky Irving to be the lead back. And obviously if he plays well, he can get more carries. So not the guy that I would be plugging in cash games or anything like that. But if you do need a low owned running back in this price range that does still have a really high ceiling and at least a path to a really big workload, Bucky Irving is still certainly in that category. For the next game, we have Cincinnati taking on Minnesota, and this is an interesting one because we have 2 backup quarterbacks going up against each other. Jake Browning for Cincinnati, Carson Wentz for Minnesota. Browning is probably better than Wentz. He made, I believe, 7 starts a couple of years ago when Burrow was hurt. He actually played pretty well. One thing that stood out from those starts, and I don't want to overstate it, it probably is noise, because if you're a young quarterback with 7 starts under your belt, you'd probably like to throw to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins a lot. But what was really interesting was that the target share for Bengals receivers actually flattened out a lot with Browning compared to Burrow. You had Chase and Higgins both come down. Chase, I don't remember the specific numbers off the top of my head, but I think Chase was in the 23 to 25% range as opposed to upper 20s. Higgins was in the 18 to 20% range. And then Yoshivas went from, sub 10% with Burrow to mid-teens, maybe low 20s with Browning. Again, I'm not projecting that to happen. I'm not saying oh yeah, Yoshi's actually the number 1 receiver because Browning's the quarterback or anything like that. But it is worth, I guess kind of keeping in mind that Burrow does have that rapport with Higgins, with Chase, and he's such a good quarterback that, maybe he's willing to throw the ball to them in some situations that Browning isn't. Browning is a little bit more willing potentially to just kind of check down, go to, underneath guys, as opposed to forcing the ball to Chase and Higgins. So from an upside standpoint, I still think they look very good. It's still Jamar Chase. It's still T. Higgins. They have even if it's not Jake Burrow, they do have what seems like a competent quarterback in Browning. You're not getting any ownership coming into them. But from an upside standpoint, clearly still look good. I did just kind of want to point out that we did see that change over 7 games in target share for those guys, just kind of flattening out, and Browning spreading things around more. Chase Brown coming in at 6,900, 5% owned. He's another running back in that bucket of clearly not the top guy on the slate, but certainly appealing to get to in tournaments at low ownership. He's gotten like every backfield carry for Cincinnati, and he just hasn't really run good on touchdowns yet. He hasn't had that big breakout game, but the usage for him has been fantastic. And he's in this weird price range where he's going to be tough to get to in like optimizers because he's $1,000 to $1,500 more expensive than guys like Walker and Mason. And then you have so much value on the slate that it's easy to just find the extra salary to get to guys that project better, like Robinson, like Taylor, like McCaffrey, etc. So it kind of just squeezes him out when his ceiling is still really high. Like he's probably still going to get pretty much every touch for the Bengals. They could run a little bit more, be a little bit more run heavy here, given that they do have, Browning at quarterback. And Minnesota, at least last year, was also a team that teams ran against much more than they threw against as well. So I do like the upside that Chase Brown gives you here. Einsteinium said since he wants to make the playoffs, they better pepper their best players. Yeah, agreed. I don't think it's like, I doubt that it's a by design thing. Like I doubt Browning's coming in and saying like, oh yeah, like I'm tired of watching Burrow just feed these two guys. I'm going to spread it out. It could easily be more of like a talent level / risk tolerance thing though, where Burrow is very confident. Just, I don't really care if he's got a step or not. I'm throwing Chase the ball. That's my best guess at it, is that like if it is real, there's also the chance that it was just 7 games and it's random and you're not going to see that happen at all. If it is real though, that's kind of my assumption, is just that, it's a different level of quarterback and he is going to play it safer potentially than Burrow. He's not going to force throws that maybe Burrow would. But either way, like that's a median projection conversation if you get into it, much more so than a ceiling conversation, because obviously either of these guys can still have massive games. One other thing to point out, and I don't think it matters really for this slate, but we did see Mike Gesicki last week take on a much bigger workload than week 1. I'm pointing that out because I did think it was something interesting, because we don't know how exactly they're going to utilize him and Noah Fant. And then in week 1, you actually had higher route participation for Fant than you did for Gesicki. But Gesicki was dealing with, I believe, a knee. It might not have been a knee, but he was definitely dealing with an injury in the preseason. So the question was kind of, are we just going to see Fant and Gesicki split routes, or is this Gesicki working his way back? In week 2, Gesicki ran routes on 65% of dropbacks compared to 25% for Fant. So it does seem like Gesicki is the tight end 1 here, if you wanted to go there. He's not getting any ownership. There are plenty of, reasonable tight ends on this slate. But I did want to point that out, that it does seem like Gesicki is still ahead of Noah Fant as far as tight ends go here. On the Minnesota side, we get to one of our chalk running backs. Starting here with Carson Wentz, though, he's 4K flat. There are actually multiple 4K quarterbacks that you can play here. He's getting 7% ownership. He's fine. He's facing a Bengals defense that we know is not good. He isn't good either, but on the, scale of backup quarterbacks, he's not the worst. Like there's always some backup quarterbacks where it's just like, holy shit, they're not going to be able to move the ball. This guy can't even throw. Carson Wentz isn't, that level of bad. He does still have good playmakers here, and the matchup is really, really good. The one thing he doesn't give you, in addition to a lot of talent, is a lot of rushing upside. And I mentioned that because you do have Marcus Mariota at that 4K price tag as well. So Mariota should be more popular, but Mariota is also going to project better because of that rushing upside. Jordan Mason going to get a ton of ownership here at 5,400, and it's well-deserved. Projected for nearly 40% ownership. We had Coach speak during the week about them being comfortable using Mason as a bell cow. We had already kind of seen him seemingly start to already overtake Aaron Jones. He's looked better. He's been more effective. You should see him more involved in the passing game with Jones out as well. The Vikings had said that they thought he could handle that role, and he's been somewhat involved so far, but like Jones, obviously still plays that role. Now you get Jones gone, and there's nothing really behind Jordan Mason. They signed Cam Akers. They activated him from the practice squad. They had some nice things to say about Xavier Scott, but I feel relatively comfortable that we're going to get a very clear Jordan Mason running back one, certainly the goal line guy, I would expect. And he's just going to look really, really good in this spot at 5,400. The Vikings would probably like to run the ball more than usual as well, given that Wentz is playing quarterback. You can look to the passing game to be a little bit different if you want. Justin Jefferson is down to $7,500, getting 9% ownership. That is a cheap price tag in raw salary for Jefferson. It's not as cheap as it seems on the surface, just because of how underpriced everybody is today. You have plenty of salary. You're not, looking for spots where somebody's $300 underpriced or anything like that. Not to say that Jefferson's only $300 underpriced, but you do have a lot of really underpriced wide receivers. But clearly, he looks good. I wouldn't say it's like a negative correlation play to Mason. You can certainly play them together. Fully would expect that this offense is running through Justin Jefferson and Jordan Mason. And if they are able to move the ball, obviously it is good for both of them. They're both underpriced. But you could use Jefferson as a way to say, all right, well, what if, Mason obviously is going to be, not obviously going to be decent, but like probably going to be at least decent. But to win large field tournaments, you need better than decent. So like, what if Mason scores 13 fantasy points, but the touchdowns all go to Jefferson? You can make that sort of kind of negative correlation argument, but also certainly could play them together. Hockenson, 3,800 at tight end, throw him in the really large bucket of tight ends around 4K that could catch touchdowns. Einsteinium said, would you stack this game? You certainly could. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. Like Browning, Chase, Jefferson, Mason, you're going to have plenty of value elsewhere. There's nothing that would like make me not want to. There's other games that I think I'll probably get to a little bit more, but if this game had Burrow and to a lesser extent McCarthy, I think everybody would be really interested in stacking it. And so I do think you can make the case of like, yeah, obviously it's not as appealing because you have two backup quarterbacks going, but it's also not exactly the best defenses, particularly on the Cincinnati side. And there are still a ton of talented playmakers here in the passing game, in addition to, Chase Brown and Jordan Mason. So I do think that that's an interesting way to approach it instead of just, grabbing Mason and moving on, or grabbing Jefferson and moving on. If you do kind of just say, well, what if this game just shoots out and, neither of these, again, on the scale of backup quarterbacks, neither of these guys are terrible. So there is still a decent chance that you actually get productivity here. Pittsburgh taking on New England in New England, about a 23-point total for the Steelers, about 21-22 for the Patriots. Jaylen Warren getting some ownership for Pittsburgh. He's only 5,500. He's been the lead back for the Steelers. Kenneth Gainwell has been more involved than you would probably like. But he is only $5,500. Curious to see the inactive list for the Steelers as well. Not that it matters too much, but it does seem likely that Caleb Johnson is not going to be active today. They activated Trey Sermon. I doubt they're going with 4 running backs. I certainly doubt that they're making Warren or Gainwell inactive. So writing kind of seems to be on the wall after mistakes last week that Johnson probably won't be active, but it doesn't matter too much because he hasn't been involved anyway. So Warren probably going to pretty much split passing downs with Gainwell. We've seen Gainwell run routes a bit more than Warren. Last week, it was 41% for Warren, 41% of dropbacks, 41% route participation for Warren, 49% for Gainwell. But most of the rushing workload should go to Warren. Touches in the red zone should go to Warren. You don't really have like a QB touchdown threat, rushing touchdown threat really in Rodgers at this point in his career. So that's good for Warren, and mostly just underpriced at 5,500. And again, like that's not low ownership, but there are a lot of running backs, several running backs that are going to get more. Like Walker is going to be more popular in this price range. Mason is going to be more popular in this price range. So you are still getting an ownership discount, even though it's not, an unowned running back or anything like that. DK Metcalf, pretty cheap at 5,700. No Christian Gonzalez for the Patriots. 5.5 yard average depth of target for Metcalf this year is concerning. It is something, if that continues, where you would expect catch rate to go up, but yards per reception, obviously, to go down compared to what we were used to in Seattle, where he was the big play guy. You would think that they start to get him more big play opportunities given, his skill set, his size, all of that. But that is a concern for me so far for what we've seen from Metcalf, is that they're just using him completely differently than he was in Seattle. They're still running deep routes with Calvin Austin, who's been on the field a ton, but they're using Metcalf short more often. That's not to say that he can't catch a bunch of passes. He can't, break some tackles and make a big play after the catch, but you're not seeing, at least through 2 weeks, the same big play opportunities necessarily for Metcalf that you have previously, but he is also cheap at 5,700. I think those are the two most interesting guys from Pittsburgh. Not really too interested in Rodgers on this slate. There's, other pay down quarterbacks to get to. Drake May getting 3% ownership. I do have some interest in him in tournaments. You do get rushing upside with him. I do think he's kind of like I was talking about with Chase Brown, but with quarterbacks, where on a lot of slates, you would probably be getting a lot of ownership coming into $5,300 Drake May. The Steelers defense has given up plenty of production to opponents so far this year. May can get it done with his legs. He can get it done through the air. But because you have 4K Mariota, you have 4K Wentz, you have plenty of value at other positions, and you can afford to pay up at quarterback, you're just seeing May, I think, kind of slip through the cracks. Even though he's not in a bad spot, he does give you a high ceiling. I am interested in him in tournaments at low ownership. If I am going to go to a quarterback today that either isn't, the best point per dollar guy or one of the highest raw projected guys, I would prefer that it be somebody like May that can get it done with his legs and at least gives you, access to rushing touchdown upside, access to some rushing yards, and a bit higher ceiling than, quarterbacks that are only throwing. Ramondre Stevenson, solid game last week, heavily involved, not getting any ownership here at 5,300. I don't anticipate really getting to him much either. You have kind of a gross three-way split. Like, he is the primary guy in the backfield, but Antonio Gibson was more involved last week. Henderson is still hanging around, probably, gets more involved at some point going forward, although last week didn't really make a strong case for him to get more work this week. 3 holding calls on, I believe, like 19 snaps or something like that. But there's just so many good running backs this week. It's still hard for me to get to Stevenson. Nobody on the Patriots is getting much attention. $4,800 Diggs if you're going to May, probably a pretty good stacking partner there. You can make the case for a $3,800 Henry as well. Kayshon Bouttie's been on the field a lot. Didn't have the same level of success last week that he did in week 1. I fully expect him to just be a very volatile option because it's not like the Patriots are a team that's typically going to throw the ball a ton. They have, so far this season, week 1, they were the highest passing rate over expectation. Week 2, they were slightly below. So we'll see how things go. They're not a team that I expect to consistently be throwing the ball a ton. I expect them to be a team, with more of a defensive mindset, defensively minded head coach, young quarterback still. But you will get those games, I think, where they just go through the air more for one reason or another. And it's not a bad spot for him here. So I think Diggs would be the guy that I wanted to pair with May first, followed by Henry, then probably followed by Kayshon Boutte. Not a priority stack, but one that I do think is going a little bit overlooked in what's been a pretty solid matchup so far against Pittsburgh. Raiders taking on Washington in Landover, close to Washington. 20-point implied total for the Raiders, 23 for the Commanders, who, of course, are without Jaden Daniels. Starting on the Raiders side, 3% ownership coming into a $5,200 Geno Smith. He's another one on a lot of slates, probably would be, 7, 8, 9% owned. But because you have so much value on this slate, it pushes him down a bit. He's fine. Doesn't give you a ton of rushing upside. One thing I do like about Geno, though, is that he would come along with, I think, 2 of the better pass catching plays on the slate in Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers. Myers getting 17% ownership, Bowers getting 11%. We saw Bowers, questionable going into the Monday night game last week. Then he had like 80% route participation, which was up from week 1. And we did see this Washington team last Thursday completely unable to slow down Tucker Kraft. Kraft just absolutely decimated this team. Not to say that automatically means Bowers has a monster game or anything like that, but Bowers is really, really good and certainly capable of just replicating what Tucker Kraft did. Similarly, Jacoby Myers was relatively disappointing in terms of fantasy production in that Monday night game where he was really popular, but he still got like 12 targets. He had 10 targets week 1. This offense is just funneling through Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers. So I think that's kind of the case for Geno. If you wanted to go there, is like, if you just have a lineup that has Jacoby Myers and it has Brock Bowers, why not throw in the $5,200 quarterback and then, get some good players elsewhere? I don't think it's like a great, standalone option necessarily. But I think it's fine, if you already have those guys, just, throw Geno in there. Not too much interest in Trey Tucker, Dante Thornton. Both of those guys are legitimate deep threats that are cheap, but on this slate, there's just so many good cheap plays. At best, I would say those guys are limited to like, $20 milli maker dart throws where you just hope one of them catches like an 80-yard touchdown or something. For Washington, Mariota Mariota is the best value quarterback on the slate. He's 4K. He's projected for 22% ownership. He has rushing upside. He has passing upside, enough of it. He looked very good in the limited opportunities he got last year. Started week 18, I believe, with Washington not having anything to play for. Came in, if I remember correctly, the first half against the Panthers and looked really good. Not that that necessarily means anything because the Panthers suck, but he looked really good, especially for a backup quarterback. But he also gives you that rushing upside, gets it done with his legs, and that just increases the floor as well at only 4K. I think you can play him naked. I don't think you have to force in, Terry McLaurin or Zach Ertz just for the sake of it, because he can get it done with his legs. And you just have this slate where, part of the reason that stacking is so good is, obviously you're trying to cut down on the number of things that you have to get right. But when you're talking about Mariota being 4K, he doesn't have to throw a bunch of passing touchdowns for him to have a good game. He's so cheap. And it's also, when you think about stacking, when you have tighter pricing and nobody or few players really look good at their respective salaries, then you can kind of say, well, all right, I don't like any of the wide receivers in this range. I may as well play Terry McLaurin because I already have Marcus Mariota. And if Mariota does well, it is more likely that McLaurin does well. That isn't the case on this slate, though. You have so many good receivers that project better than somebody like McLaurin. Not taking anything away from McLaurin, but you have guys in that price range that just project a lot better, that you are giving up quite a bit in the way of projection for a modest increase in correlation, but it's not even like a massive increase because Mariota is likely to get so much of his production, through on the ground and just through spreading the ball out. So I think McLaurin is fine. He is going to be low owned, as is Debo. So like you could make the case that one way to be different is to, have Mariota, Debo, McLaurin, something like that, because the pass catchers are going to be low owned here. But I certainly don't think you have to force stacks with a 4K Mariota. Zach Ertz is another tight end in that $4,200 bucket as well. Somebody in chat said, does Wentz's prior propensity to over target his tight end do anything for Hockenson for you? Not really. I mean, it's a different team. It's a completely different situation. I would say whenever something like that comes up, I would say that it's more so it doesn't like it wouldn't make me like Hockenson less, obviously. If you're looking at tight end and you're trying to decide between Hockenson and somebody else and you want to use that as a tiebreaker, sure. But I'm also not going to say like, hey, Carson Wentz threw to whatever tight end he had on Washington 2 or 3 years ago. So I think he's going to look off Justin Jefferson and throw to TJ Hockenson. I certainly wouldn't go that far with it. Also, running back here for Washington, if you do want to be different, if you are somebody that believes in him, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt should be getting the start. He is 5,500. He is going to get no ownership today because he is not Jordan Mason. He is not he is not Kenneth Walker in this price range. He probably isn't going to have the same workload as them either. He has to contend with Marcus Mariota and his legs. So even though it's not Jaden Daniels, you do still have a rushing quarterback here. By design, Washington has a backup that can run this offense similarly to Daniels. You still have Debo, who hasn't been very involved as a rusher so far this year, but still is somebody that they can look to in the red zone. You will probably have Chris Rodriguez active today, I would assume. That's somebody that could steal goal line carries as well as Jeremy McNichols. We saw McNichols do it last year as well. So I still expect McNichols to basically take the Eckler role on passing downs and be in there as the third down back. I think it's likely, but not guaranteed, that Krosky Merritt takes over the Austin Eckler early down role, where we were seeing kind of alternating drives or even just, repeated Eckler drives where he was out there first and second down as well. I assume that you're going to mostly just get that being Krosky Merritt. But again, they could give more carries to McNichols than I expect. Rodriguez could be more involved than I expect. So you definitely don't get the same more or less guaranteed role for Krosky Merritt that you do for Walker and Mason, but you do have the potential for a very big role here on an offense with a good total at a good price tag and no ownership. So that would be the ownership case for him, but certainly doesn't project as well as those other guys do. Green Bay taking on Cleveland in Cleveland. 24.5-point total for the Packers, 17 for the Browns. Jaden Reed is on IR. Josh Jacobs, another good running back here. He's dominating carries out of Green Bay's backfield as expected. He's involved somewhat in the passing game as well. 7K price tag, 12% ownership. He's another guy in that like Saquon Barkley bucket where he's going to have ownership, but not as much as the most popular running back plays. So you will get a little bit of a leg up on the field if you go there instead. And he happens to get into the end zone a couple of times. I think he is the most appealing play from the Packers. Second most appealing play, probably Tucker Kraft. He is probable, expected to go, had the weird knee issue, got hurt in practice. You had simultaneous reporting that it was a minor thing. Nobody's worried. And then at the same time, he probably doesn't need to go on IR, which never sounds good, but seems like he's fine. He obviously had the massive game against Washington. He is still relatively affordable at 4,700. He has looked very, very good so far this year. I'm a little surprised he's not projected for more ownership, but it is just easy to get to Brock Bowers. It's easy to get to Trey McBride. You have some solid, cheaper tight end options as well. So behind Jacobs, I would say Kraft is probably my favorite guy to get to from Green Bay. Dontavian Wicks should be on the field a lot with no Reed. He's only 3,700. We've seen him involved already this year. On a lot of slates, I'd be more interested, but again, you just don't need the value necessarily. So really what that means is if Wicks has a big game at 3,700, obviously like you would like to have him, it helps you, but this is not a slate where you can see Wicks projected for like 10 fantasy points. If Wicks scores 10, 11, 12 fantasy points, it looks decent for his salary, but it's probably not doing shit for your chances of winning because you just have the ability to make lineups that are probably going to score so many points this week. On the Cleveland side, we did get confirmation that Judkins will be the starting running back this week. I assume you're still getting 3 running backs here with Ford and Sampson. That's not like a super strong belief because they've been all over the place through the first 2 weeks with what they've done with their running backs. Maybe you just now have a backfield of Judkins and Sampson or Judkins and Ford. I don't know. But my assumption is that all 3 of those guys are at least somewhat involved, with Judkins being the primary rusher and then Ford and Sampson being the primary receivers. I don't really have interest in any of them. The field doesn't have interest in any of them. There's no real interest in anything from Cleveland for the field. 1% ownership coming into a $5,200 Judy, 2% to a $3,600 Fannin. I would say I'm probably a little bit more bullish on Fannin than the field is. He once again ran routes on 65% of dropbacks last week. And Njoku, again, was up around 80%. So we're continuing to see not Fannin replace Njoku, but Fannin play a lot of snaps alongside Njoku. Now, the downside to that is there's only so many snaps available for Fannin if he's not going to take Njoku snaps. But they are clearly willing to use Fannin essentially as the third receiver, as opposed to an actual third wide receiver being on the field. And he's drawing targets at a very high rate when he's out there. 0.24 targets per route run, I believe, so far this season. Njoku only at 0.13. That probably does even out at some point. But Fannin is somebody that in college was, prolific at earning targets, and so far has been very good at it in the preseason, in the regular season as well. So you don't have a ton of touchdown equity with him because he plays for the Browns, makes him generally a better play on DraftKings than FanDuel. But you do have some solid PPR upside where, this guy might get the most targets on the team today, even though he's not going to be on the field more than probably 65% of the time. So I do think he's still a little bit underpriced here, especially in a game where Cleveland is likely to be dropping back a lot. Speaking of which, I will mention it. I mentioned it with the Ravens, I think last week as well. I'm generally not going to have anything really to say about defenses. But the Packers are the most expensive defense on the slate today. They are also just easy to get to because of all the value. They are facing a team that has a statue at quarterback that is probably going to drop back to pass 40-something times. They have Michael Parsons. So, yeah, I mean, Green Bay, I think, looks very good. Stands out, as a defensive option today. That kind of goes without saying. Houston going into Jacksonville, 21-point total for the Texans, 22.5 for the Jags. Two offenses that have talented playmakers that have been relatively disappointing so far this season. The Texans offense has continued to look like dog shit because they cannot block anybody. And there was a lot of talk about it during the week that the new offensive coordinator here is replicating the Patriots offense as opposed to the Sean McVay offense that everybody was hoping he would replicate. So that hasn't been good for anybody. CJ Stroud is 5,500. Theoretically, the Texans have good playmakers. I doubt I'm going to get to too much of him, but he is only 2% owned. You can pair him with a 6% owned Nico Collins at 7,300, an unowned $4,700 Christian Kirk. Like, obviously there's upside there, but probably not one of the spots that I'm going to be super interested in targeting. I will be paying attention to the inactives list for Dameon Pierce. He was inactive last game. That resulted in an uptick in work for Nick Chubb. He's 5,200. He's unowned. I don't think he's any sort of a priority on this slate, but he does look better if Pierce is inactive. Jacob Johnson was added to the active roster, so I assume Pierce is inactive. But if Pierce plays, the already modest projection on Chubb does come down. At tight end, you should have Dalton Schultz running a bunch of routes. He's 3,400. Not super exciting, but he's 3,400. On the other side, Jags not really getting any ownership outside of 7% coming into Brian Thomas Jr. $6,400 price tag there. He's another one of these guys that hasn't gotten it done so far through the first 2 weeks, but the opportunities for him have been there. Had a drop right in front of the end zone last week. I think also had one in the end zone that was called back by a penalty or something. I don't remember the exact circumstances, but I remember I read it and was pissed off about it because I had him. He has been targeted on 0.27 0.27 targets per route run so far this season. Awkward way to word that. Running routes, 90+% of the time. He is still very involved. He's only 6,400. It's only a matter of time before this guy gets it going. So certainly somebody to look at in that mid-range, getting some ownership, but there are plenty of receivers that are going to have a lot more. Beyond that, I don't think there's anything that really stands out here. Largest field tournaments, you can throw darts at Travis Hunter or Diami Brown. Diami Brown has clearly won the wide receiver 3 role, at least for now. I'd mentioned it on the show last week. I didn't play him, but he immediately, of course, went out and scored a long touchdown. But there was, question marks coming into the season. If he was going to be the wide receiver 3, is Parker Washington going to step into a bigger role? Then they traded for Tim Patrick. But through the first 2 weeks, 85% and 82% route participation for Diami Brown. So, cheap, big play threat, but also completely not needed on this slate. Travis Hunter, you're going to see, I think, the route participation vary pretty drastically week by week. 82% week 1, very good to see that they can or will use him that much. Last week, he played more at corner. As a result, route participation dropped down to 60%. It adds even more volatility than you would already have when you're talking about a rookie wide receiver playing alongside Brian Thomas on a questionable offense. But, the upside is nice. Like, he could go play 80% of snaps again. Travis Etienne still, the lead back here, had a receiving touchdown last week. He's involved in the passing game. He's involved in the rushing game. We have seen Tootin, take on a bigger role as expected with Tank Bigsby traded. So you pretty much have the 2-man backfield there with Allen kind of sticking around to pass block as well. So not a priority, but ETN is certainly another guy in that 5,500 to 6K range that you can throw into your large field tournament lineups because he has a very high ceiling. It's just that he doesn't project as well as the guys that are stepping into, bell cow roles in his price range. Mason and Walker are in situations where basically they're in the situation ETN would be in if Tootin were ruled out today. So obviously those guys are going to be more popular. They're going to project better, but that doesn't actually mean that ETN doesn't have a high ceiling because he still does. Indiana taking on Tennessee with 2 of the better running back options on the slate. Daniel Jones coming in at 5,400 for the Colts, 24-point total for the Colts. Jones has been very good through the first couple of games this year. He's getting 6% ownership. He's still underpriced. Based on how well he's played this year. He gives you some rushing upside as well. He's never been a horrible fantasy quarterback, at least in terms of what it looks like when it goes well, because he has, given you rushing upside, and it's just a matter of, is he playing horribly or not? Through 2 games, not with the Giants, we've seen him play very well. So I think he looks fine. He's getting some ownership. Jonathan Taylor is the priority for me here. 26% projected ownership, 7,200 on DraftKings. Jonathan Taylor's always been a beast on the ground. He's always been a high upside fantasy play because he has a ton of touchdown equity. Nobody else on the Colts gets carries, at least out of the running backs. Jones, will get some. But the issue with Taylor, and the reason he would always be kind of difficult to play in DFS, was that they didn't really trust his pass blocking. They wouldn't use him all the time on passing downs. He wasn't really targeted much out of the backfield. And so you were getting somebody at a price point in the past where most of the guys priced around him were guys that were getting you PPR points in addition to having massive touchdown upside, whereas Taylor only had that touchdown upside. We're seeing Taylor more involved in the passing game this year, and that's an absolute game changer for him from a fantasy standpoint. It just adds so much more production to his game. It keeps him on the field. He's run routes on 73 and 71% of Daniel Jones dropbacks through the first 2 weeks, and is getting, all of the backfield carries as well. So Jonathan Taylor looks very, very good. Again, he is getting ownership, but looks great. Pittman, Downs, Pierce, I don't have a ton of interest in any of that. If you're going to Daniel Jones and you want to include one of them, fine. Pierce is playing a lot of snaps. He is still in that role as a big downfield threat that won't have any ownership. There's been plenty of guys already that we've mentioned like that, whether it be Calvin Austin or De'Ami Brown, Alec Pierce, you can throw in that category as well. Downs's snaps are down. He is still likely to draw the most targets per route run, but he's not running as many routes. He has been hurt by Tyler Warren. Tyler Warren, in addition to Taylor, a priority here, only 4,400. I think he's 5,600 on FanDuel, which is still a pretty good price over there. We just have seen Warren look good so far for the Colts. 73 and 84% route participation for him through his first 2 NFL games. 0.29 targets per route run. Downs is at 0.28. Pittman's at 0.22. Pierce at 0.14 to put that into context. Taylor at 0.11. So slight edge on Downs so far for the team lead in targets per route run, and he's running a hell of a lot more routes than Josh Downs as well. So he looks like a clear priority at the tight end position. On the Titans side, no ownership coming into $4,900 Cam Ward, a little bit coming into a $5,100 Ridley. Aomanor has looked good so far. He seemingly has very quickly gotten on the same page with Ward. He actually leads the starting. He leads the Titans starters with 0.27 targets per route run. Ridley's at 0.22. We'll see if that continues, as he runs more routes and as the season goes on. But he has been very involved. He's not getting much ownership at 3,700. Again, I think it's just that, you have all this value at quarterback. You have all this value at running back. You need to spend the salary somewhere, and it starts to come down to like, okay, yeah, he's a decent point per dollar play, just like, Dontavian Wicks is, but also I could just, play Jackson Smith and Jigba or something. So I think that's kind of the issue there. Ridley, 5,100, getting a little bit of ownership, getting 5%. Hasn't, had the big game yet, but he is still earning targets. He is still running a lot of routes. Probably just a matter of time before we see some Calvin Ridley games. $3,400 Okonkwo, if you need to pay down at tight end, he's in that bucket. But I think the best play from the Titans is another running back, Tony Pollard, coming in at 5,700. A lot of slates, he'd be a lot more popular. He kind of already has that workload that like Jordan Mason is stepping into and Kenneth Walker is stepping into, where he's just dominated backfield touches so far for this team. And his salary is still cheap because the Titans haven't scored a ton of points. He hasn't, been on the right end of touchdown variance so far. But 5,700 is a cheap price tag for Tony Pollard with the amount of work that he has gotten so far this season. Through the first 2 weeks, Pollard has 81% of the total rushing share for the Titans. Chestnut has 5. DK has 6. Ward has 8. The rest is Tony Pollard. He has the Chase Brown role on the Titans. And this is something that we saw last year as well. When Tyjae Spears was out last season, Tony Pollard just got all of the work. They didn't go to secondary secondary options. So he looks really, really good. A couple questions in chat. No late swap in the sim runner right now. Something that we obviously plan on adding eventually, but hasn't happened yet. Greg said, do the gray cells indicate spots you made manual adjustments? Sort of. So the ownership is what I adjusted. And that's just with the ownership projections that I'm using. My ownership projections. The market share stuff isn't stuff that I adjusted. It's just that I uploaded the CSV and it had market share stuff in it. But that is the stuff that's projected on the site. But ownership, I did adjust. So if you see ownership on the screen that you think is interesting, it's where I think guys are coming in. But yeah, no need for me to adjust. Like the market share is really over here because I spend so much time doing the site projections anyway. Moving on to the next one, Atlanta taking on Carolina, another game where we're going to get a really popular running back. Michael Penix, 5,600, not getting any ownership. Drake London getting some ownership at 6K, getting 12%. Bijan Robinson getting 21% at 7,900. He is the one standing out clearly as the best option. Nice matchup for him here against Carolina. He's involved in the passing game. He's involved on the ground. The only negative for him is that Tyler Algier exists, and we know he's going to have a role. We have seen differing roles through the first couple of weeks for Algier so far. Week 1, you had 43% rushing market share for Robinson, 36% for Algier. Last week, they both increased. It was a game where the Falcons really didn't need to throw the ball much. You had and Michael Penix didn't run. So Robinson went up to 56%. Algier went up to 41%. But that is a much bigger split for Robinson than really anybody else in his price range is going to get. Like you have Jonathan Taylor up there. Nobody else on the Colts is getting carries. Nobody else on the Eagles is getting carries outside of Barkley. Nobody on the Bengals is getting carries outside of Brown. Nobody on the Packers is getting carries outside of Jacobs. So that is something that, a negative for Robinson that doesn't exist for other guys is he is more at risk of just running bad on touchdowns. Algier gets the touchdown, running bad on, the not getting enough carries, whatever it may be. But he is very, very involved in the passing game as well. So obviously you do like to see that. And he's really talented in a good matchup. So he does look good. I just wanted to highlight that there is that one kind of negative that he has that nobody else around him is going to have. You don't have it with McCaffrey either at the top. But he still looks very, very good here. I do think I'm getting, at least right now, to a good amount of the Falcons passing game. And I think it has to do with a couple of things. One is that Penix is just getting no ownership here. And, yeah, I understand why. There's cheaper quarterbacks that are better point per dollar. There's slightly more expensive quarterbacks that just project better. But I think he should have more than none. And also, it's kind of what I was talking about with Geno Smith, with Bowers and Jacoby Myers. There's a lot of pieces on the Falcons that look good. Obviously, Robinson looks good, and you can use him with Penix. But Drake London looks good at 6K. He's been very heavily targeted by Penix pretty much every game that he's ever started. But then you get these secondary plays, too, where $4,500 Darnell Mooney is not getting any ownership. Kyle Pitts at 3,900 is only getting 2% ownership. I think Pitts is a very interesting tight end play. There's been a lot of talk about the Falcons coaching staff being very happy with his blocking and that allowing him to stay on the field more. He's been productive in the passing game so far, gets a nice matchup here. Darnell Mooney, I think, is just going completely overlooked here. And I don't mean this in the sense that he should be really popular, because he shouldn't. There's better value plays from a median standpoint. But with Darnell Mooney, he wasn't active week 1. And then last week he did absolutely nothing. But last week was that weird game where the Falcons just didn't have to throw the ball very much. Mooney was on the field for 100% of passing snaps for Atlanta last week. So you didn't see any sort of, ramp up period for him. He had 0.17 targets per route run, which is pretty much what you expect. The baseline projection for him that we have is 0.19. Like, London is obviously the alpha wide receiver there, and he's getting the bulk of the targets, but Mooney is still going to be involved. He's going to be out there pretty much every passing play. He is clearly the second wide receiver. Like, he's, behind London, but he's ahead of everybody else. So it kind of just seems like everybody is just in this, like, well, let's wait and see it happen approach with Mooney. And I don't know, we've seen it happen. We saw it happen last year. Like, he's good. He's not Drake London good, but he's good. Like, if this is a game where the Falcons do end up having to throw the ball, it's going, it's Robinson, Mooney, London, and Pitts. And Mooney is pretty likely to, play a big role if this is a game where the Falcons end up throwing. So I think that, like, the Penix plus Mooney plus whatever other pieces you want stacks are just really interesting large field tournament plays to me, given that it just seems like everybody's completely forgetting that Darnell Mooney exists and is like an actual relevant wide receiver on this offense. So I am interested in getting to some Falcons passing game, but also obviously Robinson and London individually look very good as well. On the Carolina side, nothing that stands out as a clear priority. McMillan, 5,900, 7% ownership, looks good, or as good as, any Panthers wide receiver is going to look. 0.2 targets per route run for him so far. He's been on the field a ton, which obviously you like to see right out of the gate for a rookie wide receiver that does have the pedigree that McMillan has. 88 and 90% route participation, respectively, in the first 2 weeks. So he looks fine. We do have a Q tag on Leggett as well. He has been running a lot of routes. He has not been producing anything with those routes. If he is out, you probably get more routes for David Moore, would be my guess. You're already getting a ton of routes for Renfrow and for McMillan, so they can only go up by so much. I assume you would see more of David Moore and probably more of Bryson Tremaine as well. Not that those guys would matter much for DFS. You probably would see a little bit higher target share for McMillan, though. So that's something to keep an eye on. Maybe a slight bump there. $6,200 Hubbard. Throw him in that bucket of running backs with Hall, with Brown, with these guys that are just at this kind of like salary dead zone, but he's going to get the vast majority of the work in this backfield. We saw it last year. I had some questions if that would continue this year since they brought in Rico Dowdle. And last year, there really wasn't even an alternative to Hubbard. But so far, 64% and 53% rushing workload in the first 2 weeks. Dowdle did have a bigger role last week. Maybe that continues, maybe it doesn't. But Hubbard at 6,200 at the very least does still have some upside. Definitely not a priority here, though. Denver taking on the Chargers in LA. 21.5 point total for Denver, 24 for the Chargers, who just love to throw the ball now. On the Denver side, 2% ownership coming into Bo Nix. A couple of his pass catchers are getting ownership here, and I think it's mostly warranted. Cortland Sutton at 6K getting 12%, along with Troy Franklin at 4K getting 12%. We saw Troy Franklin essentially take over a starting wide receiver role last week, where he ran, I believe, like 80, give or take, percent of routes. I think he ran more routes than Cortland Sutton did, actually. 77% route participation for Sutton last week, 90 for Franklin, only 42 for Sims. The one thing that I would caution is that historically, Sean Payton does typically kind of play musical chairs with his number one wide receiver, which is obviously still Cortland Sutton. So you are still at risk of Franklin falling back to 50% or 60% route participation and Mims being back to 60% or something like that. Like, I certainly don't think that just from every week forward, Mims is at 40 and Franklin's at 90. So that is, a risk factor, but he is also only 4K and looks like a solid value option here. Sutton is 6K. We know that, he's got obviously a capable passer in Nix. He's a good wide receiver through the first 2 games so far this season. Sutton, 0.23 targets per route run. Franklin at 0.29. No Evan Ingram for Denver either. So that is somebody that, that does open up more targets as well. He's a high target share tight end. He's being replaced by some combination of Adam Troutman, Lucas Kroll, and Nate Adkins. Those are much lower target share tight ends. So that is probably good for the opportunities for Sutton and Franklin as well. Mims, you can throw in to that like large field Millie maker maybe, where, nobody's going to click on Marvin Mims this week because last week it was Troy Franklin, but this week it could be Marvin Mims. So that is a pretty interesting ownership pivot if you wanted to make it. When you think about the volatility that comes with either Troy Franklin and Marvin Mims, and you see a 3-point projection difference, keep in mind that that's pretty small when really it's just does one of these guys score a really long touchdown or not? More so for Mims than Franklin, but still, there is a lot of volatility in here for there to be this kind of ownership difference. I do think Franklin obviously is the better play, but I did want to point out Mims that he's different than Franklin, but he's not that far off. So probably an interesting lottery type play. For the Chargers here, you are going to be getting some ownership, in particular to Keenan Allen, who somehow is still only $4,700. He is clearly still capable of playing NFL football. He has looked good. 0.28 targets per route run so far this season. Only 0.21 for McConkey, only 0.21 for Johnston. I do think, you see it level out a bit. McConkey comes up, Allen goes down, but he's $4,700. He's one of the best wide receiver values on the slate. McConkey, much lower ownership at $6,800. Fine going there as well. Fine going to a $6,200 Justin Herbert. But Allen is the priority here. Tight end, we do not have Will Dissly. That should mean more routes for $2,800 Tyler Conklin. I assume that Oronde Gadsden will be active for the first time this season, but I don't think much of any DFS impact there. Saints taking on the Seahawks. To me, this is one of the more interesting games to talk about, which is kind of weird because it's the Saints and the Seahawks. But we have a 17-point total for the Saints. We have a 24-point total for the Seahawks. $4,900 Spencer Rattler, not getting any ownership, which again is because one, he's Spencer Rattler and his team has a 17-point total, but also you have 4K Wentz, you have 4K Mariota, you have May, who's only a few $100s more, etc. Alvin Kamara, 6,300, 8% ownership. We saw the targets return last week for him. Very interested to see how that progresses. Week 1, he was very uninvolved in the passing game, and there are some concerns about how Kellen Moore will use him because of how Kellen Moore has not really designed a ton of plays for one specific player at any of his stops in the past. But last week, Kamara did get the targets. He is only 6,300. There is at least still, some upside there. There is plenty of downside as well. The pass catchers are very interesting to me. Talked about it last week. We got the good game from Juwan Johnson in particular, but very concentrated target shares for the Saints so far this season. 0.29 targets per route run for Chris Olave, who is only $5,200. 0.27 targets per route run for Juwan Johnson, who is only $3,900 on DraftKings. Shaheed, 0.19 targets per route run, much lower ADOT this year than last year so far, which should lead to more receptions, but less home run plays. And then Kamara coming in at 0.15. So you do have a really, really cheap stack for the Saints, and they were a little bit below expectation in passing rate last week. In week 1, they threw more. They were 14th in target or in passing rate over expectation week 1. But they've also been playing fast. And so you're getting additional plays here for an offense where where they're throwing the ball and they're all cheap. So they are very interesting to me. Chris Olave in particular at 5,200, also Juwan Johnson at 3,900. I like both of those guys a lot. And then there's, clearly nothing wrong with a $4,600 Shaheed either. But I wanted to point it out here that I think the Saints just end up with more passing plays today than the prop market suggests. And so I think that as a whole, their passing game probably goes a little bit under-owned. And then I think it's kind of a similar thing here with the Seahawks where you have to start with Kenneth Walker. Obviously, he's the priority here. He's 5,800. He's getting 40% ownership. I think it's very self-explanatory that, assuming Charbonnet, who is doubtful, sits, Kenneth Walker is clearly one of the best running back plays because he is not priced to be the lead back here. I would point out, if you're looking for maybe reasons for caution or reasons to not go to him at 40%, on the one hand, there's no real other alternatives in the backfield. You have George Holani, you have Jacardio Wright. I don't think those guys are taking significant carries away from Kenneth Walker. But Kenneth Walker is somebody that was limited in the preseason. They were clearly cautious with him. They haven't, turned him loose in week 1 or week 2. He was splitting with Charbonnet up until Charbonnet's injury. Maybe they go a little bit lighter on him than people are expecting. And, not to say that it wouldn't still make him look good at 5,800, but when you're talking about a week where you do have all these other good value plays, it does matter if you're talking about, well, does he get 60% of the carries or does he get 70% of the carries? Either is good, but one is, 40% ownership good, and the other is, 15, 20% ownership good. So that is a potential downside. And then when you think it through a little bit further, how do you limit Kenneth Walker's carries somewhat? Again, I'm not talking about like 10 carries or something, but I'm talking about the, 15, like getting him 15, 16, 17 instead of 19, 20, 21. If you don't want to also, don't want to give it to Jacardia Wright or Helani, maybe you throw a little bit more. The Seahawks were a pass heavy team last year. They've been very run heavy this year, but that is something that I expected when, one, they change quarterbacks, you go to Sam Darnold, but also you have both of Charbonnet and Walker with the new quarterback. Why not run the ball a lot? You have this improved O-line. You have these two good running backs. What if they're just a little bit more pass heavy this week since you only have one running back? And you put the ball in Darnold's hands a little bit more. So I don't think that necessarily opens up a ton in the passing game that you wouldn't have already liked because Smith-Njigba is one of the best wide receiver plays on the slate, whether you think they throw more or not. He is $6,500, which is an absurdly low price tag. He is listed questionable with an illness, but he's expected to go through the first 2 weeks so far this season. 0.44 targets per route run. Absolutely insane. Target percentage is very, very high. Projects for like a 30+% target percentage going forward. He really has no competition in the passing game outside of Cooper Kupp. And he's clearly ahead of Cooper Kupp. So very, very, very much like Smith-Njigba at that price. And so does everybody else, regardless of what I was just saying about pass rate. But maybe it does pull up Cooper Kupp a little bit at 2% owned and 5K. Maybe it does make $5,100 Darnold a little bit more interesting if they throw a little bit more. So I don't think it's like super actionable in the sense of it changing the way you approach the slate. Like, I still think Kenneth Walker looks very good. I still love Smith-Njigba, and so does everybody else. And it doesn't move the needle enough to make like Kupp or Horton or somebody a priority. But it is something, that I think is possible, that maybe you just see a little bit of an increase in pass rate for the Seahawks offense with Charbonnet out. Arizona taking on San Francisco in San Francisco. 21.5 point total for the Cardinals. 23.5 point total for the Niners, who are once again starting Mac Jones. Kyler Murray getting 2% ownership. Nobody on the Cards getting too much ownership outside of Trey McBride. McBride, I mentioned it earlier, one of the best tight end options today. It's just very easy to get to him at 5,700. He has led the team so far with 0.25 targets per route run. Marvin Harrison is only at 0.16 for comparison. We know McBride, ran horribly on touchdowns last season. That's likely to correct itself sooner than later. And at 5,700 with the amount of, the role he plays in this offense on a full PPR site, that just looks really, really good. Beyond that, I think it's tournaments only. If you want to take a shot on a high upside $6,100 Kyler Murray or $5,600 Marvin Harrison Jr., the prices are certainly reasonable for the ceilings that they give you, but their median projections both are not enough to make them look like priorities. Same thing can be said for James Conner at 6,500. I would probably say he's even a tier below like the other guys that I've already mentioned at 5 to 10% ownership in this range. Trey Benson has played a real role so far this season. That's something that was talked about in the preseason, and you kind of hear it and you say like, yeah, okay, we'll see. Only 14% rushing market share for Benson last week, 50 for Conner, but week 1 was a 44-30 split for Conner. We've also seen Benson involved in the passing game. So for Conner, I think it's even a little bit more difficult to get there than it is to get to like Breece Hall or Chase Brown or those types of guys. On the other side for the Niners, we have the biggest Q tag on the slate in Juwan Jennings. He is, it appears, truly questionable. Didn't practice this week. Did play more last week than he had in week 1 by a lot. 67% route participation week 1, 90% last week, and then doesn't practice at all this week. So we'll see. If he's out, it increases the projection for Ricky Pearsall. I would also expect $3,500 Kendrick Bourne to play a lot. He ran routes on like 60% of dropbacks last week. He jumped ahead of Valdez Scantling. So I think that if Jennings is in, you're probably looking at the main 3 wide receivers being Jennings, Pearsall, and Bourne. And if Jennings is out, it probably switches to Pearsall, Bourne, and Valdez Scantling. They did activate Malik Turner as well, if you want to read anything into that. But they do also have an inactive Jordan Watkins. So I'm not reading into it too much, but it's probably, it can't be a good sign. It can be a bad sign. The guy getting the most ownership here, obviously, is McCaffrey at 8,200. Entire offense runs through him, getting 27% ownership. You have Brian Robinson in the backfield, so not much competition there. McCaffrey, obviously, very involved as a pass catcher. 61 and 50% rushing workload in the first 2 weeks. But as far as compared, backfield rushing workload, pretty much the same. You had 25% for Robinson week 1, 23% week 2. The only real difference, or the biggest difference for McCaffrey, was that Mac Jones ran it a bunch last week. He is 5K. Speaking of Jones, if you want a low-owned, cheap quarterback instead of Mariota, Wentz, etc. But, I don't think any sort of big priority. McCaffrey is the clear priority here. If Jennings is out, Pearsall looks better. If Jennings is in, I think both Jennings and Pearsall look fine. But I think that Jennings would look a little bit better. I do need to, in the final projections update, we will walk back Jennings' route projection a little bit just to account for the fact that he's clearly not 100% healthy. But do keep an eye on the wide receiver room here. There could be some value opening up depending on the status of Jennings. And then finally, Dallas taking on Chicago in a game with the highest total on the slate. And it feels like it's not even that important given, all the ownership we've already talked about. Dak Prescott, 5,900, getting 8% ownership. No issue with that. Javonte Williams, 6,100, has been the clear lead back for Dallas so far. He is getting 5 to 10% ownership, which I think makes sense here as well in a game with a very high total. The biggest priority for the Cowboys, not surprisingly, is CD Lamb at 8K. It's CD Lamb. I don't think I really need to say a whole lot there. You have the highest total on the slate. You have Lamb, who's drawing 0.28 targets per route run so far this season, running routes nearly 100% of dropbacks as well. He is great if you can get there. George Pickens in tournaments still gives you that big play upside. You'll probably end up being really annoyed by a 40-yard pass interference instead, but once in a while, he'll actually catch that and maybe score on it. So, in tournaments, I think Pickens is certainly interesting, but Lamb is the priority in any format. Ferguson is a good-looking tight end as well at 4K. If you aren't paying up for Bowers or McBride, and you're not going to $4,400 Warren, you do get a nice ownership discount between Warren and Ferguson, with Ferguson only coming in at 8%. 0.26 targets per route run so far this season for Ferguson. He has been very, very heavily involved so far in this offense, despite the addition of George Pickens. On the Bears side, we had a Q tag on DeAndre Swift, but he is expected to go. He's 5,600 and getting 7% ownership. There's a lot of volatility here that I think makes him interesting. In week 1, Swift dominated backfield touches for the Bears. Monangai didn't even touch the ball. You had a 65% rushing market share for Swift, 23% for Williams, 11.5% for DJ Moore. He got all the running back carries. Last week, 44% rushing market share for Swift, 26 for Monangai, but a lot of that was garbage run in that blowout against the Lions. So on the one hand, I would argue that you should be projecting the vast majority of the workload to once again go to DeAndre Swift, which would make him look very, very good at 5,600 in a game with a 50-point total. Obviously, people have their opinions about DeAndre Swift, but we know that running back fantasy production is mostly about opportunities. The quad injury concerns me a little bit, not in the sense of I don't think he's a good play, but in the sense of, okay, the guy has a quad injury. You've already said that you maybe want to be getting Monangai the ball at least a little bit more anyway. Do we get, 50% rushing workload instead of 60 or 65 from Swift? So I think he looks fine here. If you have a different read or you just want to roll the dice more, there is volatility in this projection, and the field, I think, is certainly leaning towards the more conservative projection. So you could like basically if you knew for a fact, and obviously like you won't know this until the game starts or after the game even, if you knew that you're getting the workload, the competitive game workload that we've seen so far for DeAndre Swift at 5,600 and 7% owned, you're probably jamming him in lineups a pretty high amount. Like he's somebody maybe you're playing 20, 25% at that ownership if you know that he's getting that 60+% rushing workload. He's being involved as a pass catcher and all of that. If you are getting he's still the lead back, but we're going to take it a little bit easy on him because he is banged up workload that is projected, then he's, this 5-10% guy, which is what he's pretty much being projected as. But it's always interesting in tournaments. You want to be aware of spots that have projection fragility in addition to the normal variance that just comes with a football game and random shit happening. So DeAndre Swift is somebody where you do have that fragility in his projection where maybe he's fine, and the Bears have no intention of giving Monangai more than a couple of carries in this game. And if you know that going in, you would want a hell of a lot more DeAndre Swift. So that is something to keep in mind. You can make your own decision on that. That is something I like a ton about our projection model here. If you just say, no, I think it's just DeAndre Swift show, you go in here, you make that 62%, you click smart adjust, and it will adjust the market share along with it. You click normalize, and it'll lower, Monangai's rushing market share. And when you run the sims, it will use your adjusted rates for Swift, and it'll give you a higher projection that's in line with what you think is happening. So, that's one where make your own call. I think there's a case certainly for kind of just saying, screw it. Hopefully he plays a lot. Because even if you're wrong, you still have outs, right? You can project him for 65% of the rushing workload. He still only gets 50%, but he happens to score twice, and who cares that you overprojected him? So I do think that's an interesting spot to think about. The passing game here is going to get the bulk of the ownership, and it probably should. $5,600 Caleb Williams, good matchup against the Cowboys, and also has been running a lot, partly by design, partly by the fact that nobody can block for him. But you get rushing upside at 5,600. You have, the highest total on the slate in this game. You also have pretty cheap pass catchers. Rome Odunze, 5,300. He's up there with Smith and Jigba as one of the more underpriced wide receivers today. He so far has looked like the number one for the Bears. There was talk from Bears beat writers during camp that Odunze was likely to be the number one receiver this year. Again, it was one of those that you kind of look at it and you're just like, yeah, sure. Beat writers say that every single young player is going to ascend every single season. We'll see what happens. But so far through 2 games, 0.25 targets per route run for Odunze compared to 0.15 for DJ Moore. They are both running routes, 90+% of the time. So Moore looks fine here at 10% as well. But Odunze really stands out based on just how involved he's been so far. Those two in the passing game look really good. I don't think there's much at tight end. We're still seeing Cole Kmet run more routes than their first-round pick, Colston Loveland, so far. So Kmet is in that like Mike Gesicki category where if you're trying to get a more contrarian Bears stack in the mega milli, like large field milli, yeah, maybe you use the 3K tight end and hope that he scores. Obviously he can. But, outside of circumstances like that, I don't think it's a priority. So now I'll take a quick look through the exposures that I had when I built lineups before the show. Starting at quarterback, would help if I click the right tab. Player exposure, starting at quarterback. And again, the tab, the chart over here is showing optimal rate, and it's sorted by optimal rate. So bear with me. It annoys me too. Eventually that'll get fixed. Getting to 10% Dak, which pretty much in line with the field. Jalen Hurts, I had mentioned him. I liked him as a tournament play. I'm getting over the field on him, and I'm certainly happy getting to somebody like that. Getting over the field on Baker. That one surprised me a little bit. I didn't think he looked like great or anything, but it is still Baker Mayfield at low ownership. We know that there is plenty of upside there. You can pair him with Mike Evans. That's going to look good. Obviously, you can pair him with like Irving or Egbuka as well. So I don't mind getting to Mayfield. It just kind of surprised me a little bit. Michael Penix, 17%. That's a little bit more than like I would like. And it could be, it probably actually is. You can see here that our default projection is 3% on him. The actual projection I used was like sub 1%. I need to actually put in a like floor for the ownership that I use. But the point is, like, he's not going to be popular, but when you are simming against fields for contests, they can be sensitive to like 0.5% is much different than 3%. I think it's likely I have less Penix than 17%, but that I am over the field there. And I do like that because I think, it is a spot where the Falcons are pretty likely to score a lot of points. Everybody's assuming that it's going to be Robinson in the running game, and it could be, but it could also be Robinson in the passing game. It could be London in the passing game. Darnell Mooney getting no ownership in the passing game. I think that the Falcons are a pretty appealing tournament team to me, even if it's, less than my highest owned quarterback. Scrolling down a little bit more, nothing that really stands out too much. Bunch of, 5% kind of spreading it around to other quarterbacks. Looks like I'm not getting too much Mariota, so that stands out. Not getting too much Caleb Williams. Obviously, I would be perfectly fine getting to either of those guys, but they are getting the most ownership at quarterback. And if you noticed, the ownership that I used for Mariota in particular, I have him at 22%. So I think he comes in higher than this 11% mark, and that's also why I'm not getting to him. Certainly would be playing Mariota in cash, I would fully expect. At running back, prioritizing McCaffrey, Robinson, Walker, but below the field. I had him at 40% projected. I'm getting to 20, so about half the field there, but still obviously one of my more popular backs. Taylor, Jacobs, Irving as a contrarian play. I think he comes in a little bit lower than this 11% mark. Mason, again, puts me around half the field. So if Jordan Mason has a big game, I'm not dead. Still have plenty of Jordan Mason lineups, but I am taking some of that exposure from Mason and from Walker and spreading it around to some other guys like Bucky Irving, getting to, a little bit of Brown, a little bit of Barkley, some Williams, some Kamara, just kind of spreading things out in lineups where I need to save some ownership. At wide receiver, Smith and Jigba, Puka, Lamb, Evans, London, all guys I like a lot. I'm not getting to much Odunze. I would like to get to more. Probably, at least in part, goes hand in hand with not getting to too much Caleb. Getting around the field on Garrett Wilson, who I think looks pretty good here with Taylor at 6,200. Jacoby Myers, I'm a bit below the field, but I do like him, as I mentioned, at 5,600. Getting some Jennings, which I'll swap what I can to Pearsall, I guess, if he's out. But again, I will be walking back the Jennings projection a little bit too. Over the field on Brown, which isn't surprising given that I'm getting to Hurts. George Pickens, 11%. That one stands out as interesting. 15% Olave. Very happy with that. I mentioned specifically that I like him a lot. Mooney, again, probably comes down a bit, but I do like him as a contrarian play. Getting to some Egbuka, getting to Devontae Smith. So not surprisingly, getting to contrarian wide receivers with my lower owned quarterbacks. At tight end, a lot of Dallas Goedert. Again, that goes with Jalen Hurts. I don't love it, but he is only 3,700. I think that is kind of his floor pricing wise. If nobody's going to play Tucker Kraft, like I'll play $4,700 Tucker Kraft. I'm fine with that. I do wish I was getting a bit more of this. McBride, Warren, Bowers. In general, I think that being contrarian at tight end is typically a strong approach because there is so much volatility at the position. The problem, or the thing that I don't necessarily like about this, is that these guys aren't really tight ends. They are all borderline wide receiver ones for their respective teams. So it's not the same sort of volatility. But at the same time, at the position, you do still have a bunch of cheap guys that have touchdown equity. And then you can, play them at low ownership and get to the running backs and wide receivers you really like. So I understand why it's happening. It's not the end of the world, but I certainly won't be upset if at lock I have more of the three best tight ends on the slate. I am getting to Juwan Johnson at lower ownership, which I like. I'm getting a lot of Kyle Pitts at 3,900, which I like. I like Ferguson. I like Fannin. There are plenty of tight ends that I do like getting to today. But, ideally, I probably find a little bit more McBride, Warren, Bowers. And then finally, defense, special teams, very spread out as you would expect. But the Packers are coming in at the top. I'd mentioned them. Not that it's surprising. I think everybody's very aware of the spot, but they're easy to get to. Jerome said, I'm sure you'll watch that game online from, it's an ad. That's a very well-designed ad. What's Wentz projected ownership? I have him at 7 or 8% in the run that I did before lock. So that was the assumption that I'm using. So that's all I have for you on this one. Thank you for checking out the show. Don't forget to sign up for Run the Sims using the link in the description below. The Discord link is there as well. If you sign up, join the Discord. It's the best place to post any issues you're having, know when projections are updated, etc. Even if you don't sign up yet, if you just want to hang out, get more familiar with the site, whatever, it's free. The link is in the description below. Good luck on your lineups today. See you back here next week.